Hey guys, what's up? Nick here once again. It's my full video review of the Galaxy Z Flip 5 after 2 full months of use. So let's get right into it. This is going to be the start of a new generation of my video reviews. If you're new to the channel, this is probably not going to matter to you in any way, shape, or form, so you can probably just skip to this part of the video and you can get right to the review. But for anybody who is an old viewer of the channel, for one, I just want to say welcome back, and for two, this new version of my reviews, I'm going to start out with the bad, and then I'm going to go into the good and essentially why you should not purchase this device. So starting out with what I think is the bad, that is going to start out with the battery life. So the Galaxy Z Flip 5, everybody knows with the Galaxy Z Flip series, the biggest issue with these phones so far has been the battery life. And I gotta say, sadly, this time around, it's still not much better. Now, it is better, I will say that. The only other Z Flip device I've ever owned and used myself was the Z Flip 3. So this is 2 generations newer. And granted, it is much better in a lot of ways. And of course, we'll get to that later. But in terms of battery life, it's only a very slight incremental increase. From what I've gathered with my usage, and I'm a pretty mid to average user of a phone, I don't do a whole lot of gaming, I don't do a whole lot of texting throughout the day or surfing the web or using the Google Assistant or anything like that. I kind of just use my phone for regular use, whether it's messing around with Discord for a little bit, checking some tweets, looking at some emails, replying to a couple texts, maybe one phone call, and that's pretty much it. Very average user. And with my average usage, I was pretty surprised at how bad the battery life is. With looking at specifications, I get roughly around 4 hours max screen on time with this phone before it is at 0%. Usually I unplug my phone around 8 in the morning, and by the time I'm plugging it back in around 11:30 p.m., I'm usually down to about 20 to 15% remaining. Very not good, at least in my experience with other devices. Right now, as my current driver, I have the Google Pixel 8 Pro, and I've been pleasantly surprised at the battery life. I unplugged this phone at 8 in the morning. It's now 5 p.m. and I still have 89% left. If this was this device, I'd probably be around 50% at this point. And again, this is the same usage on both devices. So, and this is with always on display as well. I never have always on with this device. So kind of just goes to show battery life is going to be probably the biggest issue with the Z Flip 5 and why I wanted to get it out of the way first. It's only a 3700 milliamp hour battery, not very big, and it is split into 2 chunks for both sides of the phone. But yeah, battery life is a big bummer. Next on my bad list is the 25 watt wired charging. Now, 25 watts sounds like quite a lot, but compared to other flagship devices, and by the way, yes, this is a flagship $1,000 plus device, you should be getting the best of the best. Some phones out there can take up to like 45 watt charging. So the fact that this only does a max 25 is pretty bad in my opinion, which in terms of actual usage, 50% charge in 30 minutes. So if you want to get up and go somewhere, you're going to need at least an hour to do a full charge with this thing. Again, I just don't think that's great for 2023. Next is something kind of nitpicky, but I do think it is a huge oversight from Samsung, and that's why I'm putting it on my bad list, is that Good Lock should have been pre-installed by default. If you don't know what Good Lock is, essentially it's the ability to use any application on your phone from the cover display. So as you can see, we have Good Lock here, and I can go through and use any application installed on my phone and use it on this cover display. Is it really that practical? Not really, but it is a little fun to mess around with some apps on a smaller display, and I will be honest in that it is pretty convenient sometimes being able to just whip out the phone in this situation, not having to flip it open, being able to check a message or an email and reply to somebody while having to open the phone, which, by the way, if you don't have Good Lock installed, you really can't do that. They do have some widgets pre-installed like the weather, the calendar, a timer, and a couple other things, but you really can't do a whole lot from the cover display out of the box. So the fact that Good Lock is not pre-installed, which by the way, I will say it's really easy to do. I'm not trying to deter anybody from like, oh wow, I have to jailbreak my phone just to get some apps on the cover display. That's not the case at all. It literally takes 2 minutes tops. You just go to the Galaxy Store, download the app, and then you're good to go. It's that easy. But again, if it's that easy, why can't Samsung just do that for us? It just kind of seems really weird. Next thing on my bad list, and this is more, again, of a nitpick. I should have probably put this in my nitpicks category, which I'll get to in a second. I just don't use the front cover display at all. I've been very surprised at how little I use this display, and that's even with the ability to use Good Lock to use any app that I want on the cover display. Now, yes, I do check the weather from time to time, like I'll just swipe over real quick to see what it's going to be like for the day, or if I have a text, I'll swipe over and read it real quick. But other than that, I don't really use the cover display all that much. I've seen people in a ton of reviews saying like, oh, because of this amazing cover display, I don't ever open the phone anymore. And I'm like, I don't buy that. I don't believe that for a second, because it's so small. And I have, you know, relatively large hands, so maybe this depends on the person, of course, but being that I have medium to large hands, I just can't feel comfortable using this cover display for most things other than just checking my notifications. And for that, yeah, it's wonderful. I love the wallpapers. I like how big the screen is, of course, and I like using it as a viewfinder, and we'll get to that later. But yeah, just in general, I just don't feel like I use the front cover display all that much. So for them to pass it off as like this is a major feature that you need on your flipping device, I don't necessarily agree. Next on my bad category, the inner display is still a plastic folding display. Now, I understand the technology is still not perfect, and it's going to be a long time until we get actual folding glass displays. So, and I know there's going to be people in the comments that are going to tell me, oh, no, it is glass. Trust me, it's glass, bro. I'm sorry, no, this is plastic. They might tell you that it's a type of nano glass or whatever that's bendable, and that may be true, but there's a layer of plastic on top of that glass, and it's still extremely fragile. So it's one of those things where the phone itself, it feels really good to use, and I love the flipping mechanism. That's obviously the biggest catch to this device and why I love it. But this inner display, even though it looks gorgeous, like this is not taking away from the actual look of the display, but the feeling of it, I still can't get over to this day. It's just, it feels like plastic. It doesn't feel good to use. I've never used screen protectors on any phone ever because I hate the feeling of my finger rubbing on plastic. I'd rather be on glass. And the fact that that's really not possible with this device is definitely something I should talk about and bring onto my bad list. And while we're talking about the inner display, the next thing on my bad list is the crease. It just doesn't go away. Sadly, it doesn't. You can get used to it, of course, especially if you're looking at videos and stuff like that. If it's a still image, you're not going to notice the crease unless you're in direct sunlight. However, over time with scrolling, you'll feel that crease every single time. And it's just, for me, I can't get past it. It's still too much of a crease for me to give it a pass or to say it's fine. It really isn't. No, it doesn't take away from the overall experience of, again, watching videos or scrolling through social media. It is a minor annoyance. I'm not saying it's a deal breaker. I wouldn't buy this phone just because of the crease, but it is there, and you can't lie to yourself saying it's not or that it's perfect. It definitely shows, as you can see here, and you do feel it while scrolling, which can be a bummer. So that is something to take into consideration, and why I highly recommend giving this phone a try in person, whether at like a Best Buy or a phone store, before purchasing it, just so you can get a feel for that plastic display with the crease and if you will be able to handle it. Next on my bad list is going to be probably a big shocker to most of you guys, but the cameras. Mostly the front-facing camera. The back or the main cameras aren't bad per se. They're just not what I expected. I expected a little bit more from Samsung, especially at this price point. I do understand they're trying to make the slimmest device possible. This is probably their slimmest phone of all time, next to the Fold series. So I understand they didn't want to make, you know, a huge gouging camera bump. I understand that. However, I still was pretty bummed by the images and video quality I got out of this camera from what I'm used to. I came from a Samsung Galaxy S23 Ultra to the Flip 5. Yes, that is a downgrade in many ways, and I totally understand that. I'm not saying that it's not. But I still expected the cameras to kind of match up to it, at least in some way, shape, or form. Obviously, yes, this is 2 cameras instead of 3 cameras like we got on the S23 Ultra. But even with the missing telephoto, I still expected the ultra-wide and the main camera to do just as fine as the S23, and that's just not the case here. We'll get more in depth of the cameras in a bit, but the main issue is actually the front-facing camera. This thing is just bad. I mean, I'm not usually one to complain about front-facing cameras on phones because I don't really use them too often. And looking back at the selfies and stuff, they just are so bad. And I think the reason that this front-facing camera is as bad as it is because the developers of this device probably assumed more often than not you're going to be using the main shooter anyway for selfies, because the cool thing is you can use this as a viewfinder, which I ended up doing anyway, because yes, it is very convenient just to double tap the home screen. I think it's double tapping the power button, and there you go. Now you got your viewfinder, and you can take selfies pretty easily. The only downside of this is that it's a square aspect ratio, and I can't figure out how to change the aspect ratio if you take it in this manner. That's the only downside to it. But this is the way you should be taking selfies on the Z Flip 5. But again, that doesn't take away from this front-facing inner display camera from being pretty much absolute trash. And next, we're going to move on to our nitpick category. I know I already called a couple of these ones a nitpick, and it's just because I feel like they're not deal breakers. And that's the reason for this next category. So the first thing is the haptics could be stronger. They're not terrible. They're not the weakest I've ever felt on a phone. I've definitely used worse haptics. But in terms of other devices, especially, oh my God, the Google Pixel Pro 8, we'll get to that in a future video. When you have a phone that has good haptics, coming back to this, it's night and day. There was a lot of calls I missed, text messages I missed, you name it, because of how weak the haptics are, because I don't know if you guys are like me, but I absolutely hate having sound on my phones. I hate disrupting the peace. I feel like they always go off at the worst times, so I usually always have my phone on vibrate, and that's why I have a smartwatch, because if I didn't have this guy, I would miss 90%, if not more, of my messages with this phone if I just had it on vibrate only. So that is something to consider if you're looking for a device that has really good haptics. Sadly, this is not the phone for you. Next, the speakers are just okay. They're not bad, and they definitely get loud. I will say, for this phone, especially for how thin it is, they get pretty dang loud. I was pretty impressed by that. However, they do start to distort pretty badly, even at 70% volume. So if you want really clear speakers or to fill a room, this is not going to do that. It'll get the job done, don't get me wrong, especially for speaker phone calls and listen to a music video or something like that, but it's not going to be the best speakers out there. This is a really small nitpick, and I'm going to have to change my focus here for this one. Let me just angle that. So hopefully you can see this on camera, but for some reason, and it might just be my phone, but I think I saw another reviewer had the same issue, so I think it is just the phone itself. It does not open like to a full flat 180 degrees. You can see it's a little bit of an angle, ever so slightly. Again, this is a nitpick, but you know, it is something you notice when you're paying $1,000 for a phone. I don't necessarily know why that it's like that, or you know, how that got past testing or to the main floor. I don't know. Maybe it has to do with the fact that this is now a full flush clamshell phone. There's no longer a gap, which is awesome, but I don't know. It's just, for some reason, it just doesn't fully open. You can kind of force it to be full 180, but you feel like you're going to snap it in half. You can see it angles up when I let go. So just kind of a weird little nitpick that I noticed. And the last little thing that, again, this is a nitpick, not a deal breaker by any means, but it is a little bit top heavy. What I mean by that is while you're holding it in one hand, clearly the top part of the phone where the front facing display is and the cameras is much heavier than the bottom half. If I were to let go of this finger, it's gonna flip out of my hand every time. It almost wants to fall out of my hand all the time. So that's why I really highly recommend using a case. I got this case here. I don't remember the brand. I got it off Amazon for like 10 bucks. But I recommend getting a case and then putting a pop socket or something on the back to hold the phone a little bit easier in the hand so that doesn't happen. Because yeah, the front or the top portion of the phone is a lot heavier than the bottom, and then that will actually fall out of your hand pretty easily. So just something I wanted to say. Again, not a deal breaker. It's just something that was kind of weird that I don't remember feeling with the Z Flip 3. Okay, now we're moving on to the good, the things I actually really enjoy about this phone, because I know that starting these reviews off with the bad makes it sound like I hate this phone or I dislike it. But honestly, I just like to get the bad out of the way first because it's the least amount of stuff on this phone that I felt in the 2 months of use. The rest is all going to be good stuff, I promise. So first thing on the good list is that it is IPX8 water resistance, which is kind of crazy to think about on a flipping device like this, especially with how thin it is. And it has, you know, like an open back hinge and everything with the crease. I was not expecting this to have any water resistance whatsoever, but it does rate it up to 1.5 meters of water for up to 30 minutes. So yeah, you can drop this in the pool, in your toilet, whatever, and it should be okay. Obviously, don't go swimming with it. Don't try to take underwater pictures, nothing like that. But it should survive a rainfall or an accidental drop from time to time without much issue. Next is the display. I know I did give it crap for the plastic feel and the crease, but everything else about this display is amazing. It's 6.7 inches diagonal, AMOLED, Quad HD display, 120 Hz, HDR10+, 1750 nits brightness. It is a very bright screen, and its resolution is 1080 by 2640 pixels with a 425 ppi density. So pretty insane quality and pretty insane specs for a display, especially a folding display. It still blows my mind they were able to get a 120 Hz display in here, and for it to be this high of quality. It's a gorgeous display. It's Samsung. I mean, I have nothing to complain about. Videos look great on it. Text is easy to read. You have a full customizable options at your disposal for text size and colors and all that stuff. And it just looks gorgeous. I have no complaints whatsoever when it comes to display on the Z Flip 5. And then even on the front here, this is another one of my pluses, is the front-facing Super AMOLED 3.4 inch 60 Hz 720 by 748 pixels Gorilla Glass Victus 2 306 ppi display. A lot to say there, but really just in general, this is a very good front-facing display. Images look super crystal clear, text is super crystal clear. You may have heard 720p and you're like, God, that's garbage, but honestly, with this size of display, you're never going to notice a difference. And it's fine that it's only 60 Hz. It does not need to be 120 because, again, you're not doing much on this front display anyway, except maybe reading a text or replying to an email or something like that from here to there. Obviously, if you do put Good Lock on here and you try to play games from the front-facing display versus the inner display, you're going to have a rougher time. It's not going to look as clean, but it still works. And the fact that it works, you can do all that from the front-facing display is insane. It's really cool. So is it kind of gimmicky? In my opinion, yes, but it's also worth it. I mean, even though I don't personally use it as much as I would like, and that's why I put it in the bad category, I understand a lot of people might use it and they might enjoy it and they might just like having full-blown wallpapers on the front of their phone. Because if you're like first glance, you don't know that this phone exists and someone lays this on a table and it just has that, you might think this is the entire phone. And that's kind of a weird conversation starter, but it's also kind of cool because you technically can do anything you want to on this front-facing display. Next is the build quality. This phone feels amazing in the hand, and it's also really just clean. It feels premium. It's got a good weight to it, even though, again, I think the upper half, it shouldn't have been as heavy as it is, or at least make the bottom half as heavy so it doesn't feel like it's two different phones connected to each other, if that makes sense. But everything else is almost perfect. I love this soft touch back. It almost makes me never want to put a case on it. It's got a nice texture grip to it. I like the color. It's a very like sage blue. This was I think a Samsung.com only color. You couldn't get it in store. But again, I really like the color on it. Not really any downsides to that. I like the dark or titanium gray edging around the entire phone. Nice aluminum side rails. It just feels really good in the hand. It doesn't feel really cool to the touch like some other phones do. And I'm not saying that it feels warm either. It's just kind of a perfect neutral, so it's not uncomfortable to hold for long periods of time. You got the rounded corners as well. It's not sharpened on the edges like some other phones are, especially folding phones. So I'm glad that Samsung went the rounded route this time. And it is a flat display. There's no like waterfall effect or anything, which I definitely prefer. So yeah, all around, I love the design of this phone. I don't really have any issues with it other than just the crease on the main inner display. Just really quick going around it, on the bottom we have the USB-C port, we have the bottom firing speaker, microphone hole. Going to the right, we have the volume slider and the power/fingerprint scanner to unlock the device. We have the hinge on top here, and then the left side, pretty much nothing except for an antenna band and the SIM card slot. So very plain, minimal design, but it rocks. It does what it needs to do. It feels great in the hand, and it does feel pretty like durable as well, I gotta say. Not many premium phones make me feel that this could survive a 5-foot drop, but this one does. I haven't done that, of course, even though I have a case on it, but it's one of those phones that really doesn't make you want to put a case on it because it feels that good to hold, and it doesn't feel flimsy or cheap in any way, shape, or form. I also like that the camera modules are off to the side. I think it would have looked kind of weird having them in the middle, even though this is kind of weird. This took me a little bit to get used to with this little cutout for the main display. I wish it was a perfect square. But on the other hand, I think it would have looked kind of weird just having this open, black space of nothingness. They could have put something else here. I don't know. But I guess they kind of made it work where they hid the Google or Samsung wallet right behind this. So if I were to swipe up, I get right to my payment methods. So that does work. But again, this took me a little bit to get used to. It kind of looks like a folder if you flip it upside down. But yeah, it is what it is. And speaking of that build quality, shutting the phone just feels amazing. I think it's one of those things that we just kind of go back to our youth of using the old school Razr flip phones. If you guys have been around back then and you had those phones, you know what I'm talking about. When you get done with a phone conversation, being able to slam that phone shut is one of the best feelings of all time. And this is no slouch. It feels really good to shut, and it feels like you are shutting a phone, and it doesn't feel like it's gonna break either. When I first got it, I was kind of worried, like slamming it shut, especially without having any type of gap here anymore. I was kind of worried it might hurt the display to shut it pretty hard, but no, this thing can survive a really good beating, and I shut it hard pretty much every time I'm done with it. I've had no issues, and it just feels really good. The hinge also is really strong. You can set it up on a table and have it at any angle you want, and it pretty much will stay anywhere you need to. It just, for some reason, doesn't lay flat. But other than that, yeah, the hinge is amazing. And I already talked about this a little bit, but yeah, there's no more gap anymore. That was a huge, I think, benefit to this phone. I don't think I would upgrade from like a Flip 4 for the Flip 5 just because there's no gap anymore. But of course, this will cut down on getting sand and dirt and particles and stuff in between your phone into your inner display. So that should help durability over time. And let's just be honest, it looks cleaner, it looks better. And this is kind of what it should have been from the very beginning. Because I remember the Flip 1, like the very first Z Flip had a huge gap that just like went down. Like it looked super weird. Was not a fan of it. Even the Z Flip 3 had a pretty big gap that I was not a fan of. So seeing that gone is definitely an A+. I also like the fingerprint scanner on the side. I've never been a huge fan of the under-display fingerprint scanners that we get on newer phones like this. They do work, and they're not much of an issue anymore, but when they first came out, they were really slow and laggy. But even still, I like and prefer the physical fingerprint scanner that we get on the sides of this phone. I don't think it's going to let me use it right now because I've been messing around with the phone and trying to unlock it. But as you can see, it's pretty quick. I don't really have any issues with it. It's never failed on me, except for when I have like wet hands. If you get out of a shower or you just wash your hands or something, it might be a little slow to react. But for the most part, I do prefer a physical fingerprint scanner on the power button. It just seems to work really well. You can even use it on the front-facing screen as well, which is very convenient. So you can see a little unlock thing there. So you don't have to worry about just using face unlock, which if you're not using this camera, the face unlock is garbage. I honestly recommend just turning it off. But the fact that 90% of the time I'm unlocking my phone in this situation, using this camera, I leave it on. I talked about this already a little bit, but again, you can use the front-facing display for any application on the phone, which is a huge plus. You can even watch like full YouTube videos on the front here, which is pretty crazy. So I do have my internet turned off right now. I'm in airplane mode, but if I were to turn that off, we get some internet here. It's probably going to go nuts trying to connect to all my stuff. All right, I had to clear out of all of my notifications. It took like 5 minutes because I've had this on airplane mode for the past like day or so. But yeah, if you get into YouTube, you can scroll through just like you could on your normal inner display. You can select a video by Jerry Riggs Everything here. You got audio playing, and you got full screen video. Obviously, it's going to be pretty small because it's trying to get the aspect ratio of the phone. I'm going to turn it down just for right now. But you can zoom in if you want to fill up the entire square and crop your video. But the fact that you can do this right on the front-facing display is pretty insane, and it's really cool. Is it practical? Hell no. I don't think I would ever do this. I mean, there's no reason to. But the fact that you can, and again, you can do this with any app on your phone. It doesn't have to be Facebook. It doesn't have to be YouTube. It doesn't have to be text messaging. You can play games on the front-facing display, and they work pretty good for the most part. If the game has the ability to mess with that aspect ratio, it'll run just fine. And here's an example of what it looks like when you get notifications. You'll see them up in the corner saying, hey, you have some notifications. Swipe over, and you get some detailed information, so you can click on them and reply to them right from the front cover display, or you can swipe them away or open the phone to go right into them as well. Absolutely love it. It's probably the best feature of the front-facing display next to what you can do with the cameras. And speaking of that, I kind of already talked about this before, but yes, you can use the front cover display as a shutter button, as you can see here. So you can use it as a viewfinder, a shutter button, all the above for both video and for photos. You can swipe between portrait, photo, or videos right from the front facing display. You also can mess with some different settings here to change the FPS and all that stuff. And you're using the main camera, so it's going to look a lot better. I'm actually recording right now. It's going to look a lot better than it would if you're using the front-facing camera on the inner display, which, in my opinion, really sucks. Another cool thing about the front-facing display with the cameras is if you are taking a regular shot like this, you can actually go up here and turn it on so people who you're taking a picture of can also see what you're doing. So this is really good for taking, you know, shots of people, or if you are going to be putting this down, like if you wanted to use it as a tripod, you can lay it down on a table like that. Now you have a viewfinder, you can run to the other side of the room, have it go on a timer and take the picture, and you can see what it looks like before running back to your phone. I find this really cool, and I like that it's a nice little nifty feature that's built in, and it's not credited enough. I think that's probably one of the biggest reasons to use a flipping phone in 2023. You can also do it with the light switch as well, or the flashlight, I should say. So if you have your flashlight on like this, you can lay it on a table, prop it up, and there you go. You got a perfect little light source. I know some people have used that before for filming videos and stuff, and it works great. Next thing on my good list is Android 13. These are not updated yet to the new 14 that we get on the Google phones, but it should be coming very soon, and I'm very excited to see what Samsung brings to the table. But for what it's worth, this phone is great with the newest version of Android 13. You have all the customizable options you would ever need. It's a Samsung device, so you can mess everything from your grid size to which one's your home page. You can mess with so many different widgets right from the home screen. It would literally take me an hour to go through all the customizable options that Samsung has at its disposal. But I gotta say that even though this is not the most stock Android version, I have to give Samsung a leg up for having the most options to the user. Sometimes it can be overwhelming. You could literally spend days messing with how many things you can change on your phone. Like, you can get rid of everything here. Like, it does not look like this out of the gate. You have to make all this the way you want it to be, which is both a good and bad thing. If you're looking for a phone that just works, like you open it up and everything's ready to go, you're probably going to want to go with like a Pixel if you're going with Android. But if you're looking for a phone with the ultimate amount of customization and options, Samsung is the way to go, and it is no slouch here on the Z Flip 5. Talking about that as well, the performance is very, very good. You have all the new stuff. You have the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 processor, Adreno 740 GPU, so you can play any of the newer games on this phone without any lag or hiccups. It does have only 8 gigabytes of RAM, which is kind of a bummer. I wish it had at least 12. Most Samsung devices, especially at this price range, have 12 gigabytes or more of RAM, so kind of a bummer to see only 8 here. But in my experience, I haven't noticed any slowdown or a reason to really complain about having less RAM, so it is what it is. And then you have two options of either 256 gigabytes or 512, which is this model here, of storage, which is awesome. I don't think there needs to be a 128 gigabyte model anymore. It might sound like a lot to you if you've had phones for years, but let's face it, the more time that passes, the bigger applications are becoming. File sizes for photos are getting insane. So 256 should be the absolute least amount you'd ever need on a phone right now, and then it should only go up from there. So 512 is what I would recommend. Hopefully next year we'll get a terabyte, but it is what it is. But still, good to see that there is no 128 gigabyte option. And then yeah, it's just a buttery, smooth performance. I don't have any gripes, issues whatsoever when it comes to the lag, apps crashing, phone crashes. Haven't had one instance of any of that, and I'm being completely honest and serious. 2 months of use. We've had some updates in that 2 months as well, some software updates, and I've never had an issue with the performance of this phone. It runs great. And I should also say with the performance as well, it does get a little hot in the hand, I will say, but it's never slowed down or told me it's overheating in any way, shape, or form. And I was using this phone out in like 100-degree plus days. Outside, again, no issues. So yeah, if you're looking for a phone that will not overheat on you or get hot in your hand to burn you or start slowing down because it's too hot with playing games or watching a movie, then this is the phone that's perfect for you because it will not do any of that. It runs flawlessly through any situation you throw at it, and it does feel like a flagship device in 2023. And the last section we'll go into is the cameras. We already talked a little bit about the cameras with the front-facing display, but just in general, Samsung devices are really great for their cameras because you get a lot of options right out the gate. So you're getting a typical photo section here, which is just your auto mode, essentially, when you can switch between your wide angle lens or your main shooter. In this phone, you get a 12 megapixel f1.8 aperture, 24 millimeter main camera, which has optic image stabilization. And you also get a 12 megapixel f2.2 aperture, 123 degree ultra wide, but sadly no optical image stabilization on the ultra wide. Both cameras can record at 4K, 30 FPS or 60 FPS, 1080p at 60 or 240 FPS for super slow motion, and 720p at 960 FPS for insane slow motion, basically. And they do support HDR10+, which is great. Then, of course, like I said, you have a 10 megapixel front-facing selfie camera, which just is terrible. It does record in 4K at 30 FPS, but it's just, don't even try using it. There's no reason. There's no reason to use it, though, when you have the ability to use the main cameras for your selfies anyway. Just don't even bother, because it's just that bad. But the main cameras aren't bad at all. They're just fine. I wish that they were a little bit better. And that's solely just looking at the pricing point. If this phone was like 800 bucks or 700 bucks, I wouldn't even be saying this. I would say these cameras are great, move on. But the fact that this is a $1,000 plus phone, you gotta be critical with it. And the cameras are not amazing. They're good, they're fine, they get the job done, but they're just not amazing. They could be a little clearer, a little sharper, and especially in low light. The low light performance was just pretty bad. It has pretty good portrait situations. I didn't really have any issues with the portraits. Video also is pretty good in terms of its stability and its sharpness and its audio. I think the audio on this phone is really good for videos, but it's just overall the image quality could be a little better. You do have a lot of options here as well. If you go into more, we have pro mode, which is good to see on the flip here. We have single take, night shot, food shot, panorama, super slow, slow motion, hyperlapse, portrait video, director's view. I'm not going to go into all these because it would take an hour to go to every single option, but as you can see, you have options. Night shot is probably the biggest letdown for me, though. I've used it a couple times to do like a comparison of this photo versus night shot. And yes, it does bring in a lot of artificial light into a shot, but it's so pixelated and blurry, it's just like, why did I even use that? It's garbage. So yeah, low light performance is by far the worst part of the phone's camera, in my opinion. But if you have decent lighting conditions, you're out midday, it's going to take just fine pictures, especially if you're just taking pictures for social media. You're not probably going to complain at all about them. It's just really, if you're looking for a photography camera, like you're probably used to with flagship Samsung devices, this is probably not the phone you want to go for. So with that, let's check out some photo and video samples, and we'll come back for the final verdict.
Big boat.
Yeah.
First down. That's a good drive. See now whether or not they can finish it off. In the red zone since 2016. He's been the best. That's predominantly.
Alrighty, so hopefully you got a taste of yourselves what the pictures and videos look like on the Z Flip 5. But with that all said, the overall verdict of this phone is if you should buy it in 2023 for its current price tag. Honestly, in my opinion, I do think this phone is worth the $1,000, mainly because of the very cool feature that you can flip open a phone and it's a folding display in 2023. Still blows my mind. It still is really fun to do. It's a great conversation starter. A lot of people are like, wait, is that like an old school flip phone or is that a new flip phone? Like, how does that work? And it's really fun just to kind of mess with people like that. On top of that, of course, the new outer display, even though I personally think it's kind of gimmicky, I don't use it as much as I probably should, I still think it's a really cool boost to the older flip devices in terms of you can show off a cool wallpaper without having to open your phone, you can reply to text messages really easily, emails, and you can get rid of notifications right on the fly without much hassle just by swiping them away. And not having to open your phone as much as you normally would, like with the old Z Flip phones, is a plus. I have to give it that. And of course, for the viewfinder stuff, I think is probably the biggest plus of this device. Being able to use this big screen as a viewfinder to use these these back-facing main cameras is a huge plus. So that right there, I think alone is worth not only an upgrade from an old Z Flip phone, but if you're just looking to get into the flip foldable market, that is a huge plus and a huge feature. But of course, it's not all just perfect. There is some issues. Like I said at the beginning of the video, the battery life I think is the biggest one that people should probably take into consideration before purchasing this phone. Are you going to be in a situation where you're not near a charger very often? If you work where you're far away from home or far away from a charger, this might not be the best option because not only is it a really bad battery, but it's 25-watt charging. It's very slow charging in my opinion. So it's not like you can just top it off in 5 minutes and get 30% and you're good to go. No, it's going to take like a full hour to do a full charge in this thing. So the battery life is probably the biggest issue. So it just comes down to your own personal opinion, how often you're going to charge your phone or use your phone away from a charger. If you don't see yourself being away from a charger too often, then this is a wonderful choice. It's very fast, it's fluid, it's got a ton of customizable options, the build quality is amazing, you get software updates for like the next 3 or 4 years from Samsung, which is great. The cameras are decent, they're not amazing, but they get the job done. All around, it's a fun phone to use. That's like the biggest thing for me, it's just fun. So with that, thank you guys so much for watching my full video review of the Galaxy Z Flip 5 by Samsung. Let me know in the comment section below if you're going to check out this phone based on my video, or if you have it, what do you think of it? Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to leave a like, share, support. As always, subscribe so you don't miss the next one, and hopefully see you in the next one. Peace out, everyone.